I did not DNF any books in March, although I probably should have. Okay, hi, hello, welcome to April. I'm here for another reading wrap up for March. I read 10 books in March. I don't believe I DNF'd any, and I am in the middle of a handful. So we'll just jump right into it. So the first book that I finished in March was Into Thin Air by John Cracker. Crackor? Not entirely sure how to pronounce his last name. This is a book where this journalist, John, he ends up on a Mount Everest expedition during, I believe, like one of the deadliest years on Everest. And he kind of recounts this like disaster and how so many people died in this like one specific time period. And I thought it would be a lot more. There was a lot of buildup and there was a lot of different people that I feel like for a like coherent novel and like retelling, it would have been better to exclude some people. And I know that sounds kind of bad to say because this is based off of a true story, but it would have been better to kind of exclude people or merge people into one for the reader's sake. It would have been able, like, I would have been better able to understand, like, who was who and what was going on, especially because a lot of these people had very similar names and were very similar people. I also feel like he didn't really go in depth about, like, the people and, like, who he was with and where they really came from, except for like a handful. Like there were some people who died in this expedition that he just didn't really talk about. And it was really boring. It was really boring. And like it shouldn't have been boring. And there's so much build up to this actual disaster. And then I don't know, it was just it was very confusing. And I feel like going into it, you have to have a knowledge, like some kind of knowledge of what like large mountain climbing is and like what goes into it. And it would have been really helpful to have like a diagram or something to refer back to because he's talking about base camp, but he's talking about base camp like 7 different times. So it's like, is this the same camp? Because to me, someone who doesn't know a lot about mountaineering, I would assume that base camp is like the first one, you know, or like one of the main ones, maybe a little higher up on the mountain. But it was just very confusing to kind of keep track of like where he was on the mountain because like saying that it's day X, Y, and Z and he's 14,000 feet in the air, like that doesn't actually help me at all because I have no
I also
like
don't really
point of
have
reference
a
for how tall
great
14,000
understanding when it
feet
comes
really
to numbers in
is.
a book. You can say 14,000 one chapter and say 20,000 the next, and by the time I hear 20,000, I will have kind of ignored the 14,000. When I'm reading and I hear a number, I don't really like internalize that number. I just kind of move on with an understanding of like, oh, that's a big number. So having some kind of diagram I think would have really helped to ease this issue and made things a bit more clearer for the reader. Or like instead of using the exact feet, but just be like, oh, we are 3/4 of the way up the mountain, because that makes a lot more sense to me than these random feet numbers.
You know? So I feel like it was just very confusing to read, and I think that they're like there are podcasts that could have explained everything better and in a more engaging way than he did. I also, and this is fully because of the audiobook, but I thought it was a choice. It was definitely a choice for the audiobook narrator to use accents for different characters. I'm not usually a fan of accents in an audiobook, even if the character has an accent. And I think that's just because, like, I don't read in an accent, so I don't want to hear it in an accent. And it's really interesting to hear what I assume is a white man read, like, a New Zealand accent or a Southern accent or, like, an accent of someone from Nepal. And that just really took me out of it. So, overall, I did not enjoy this book. It was not the best start to my March reading. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book I read was Becoming Unbecoming by Una. This is a graphic novel, and it's kind of a coming of age graphic novel. It parallels this serial killer in, I believe, like England, and the parallels of how the media is treating the women that this person has killed with how people treat women in real life, just like in the day to day, and the kind of misogyny that Una had experienced growing up, and how it kind of parallels with how the media talks about this serial killer. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was really well drawn, and learning like about Una and like her kind of part, like it was a part memoir as well that I really liked. I thought it was really good. I gave it a 4 out of 5. The next book I read was Run for the Hills by Kevin Wilson. This one was very interesting to read. So it is about these families, these siblings who don't know that they're siblings. Their father, their shared father has left every single one of their families, and they are like the only sibling in each of these families. And so it starts with our main character is the second child from this father, and the oldest goes on this adventure to find his other siblings as he finds out about them, and find these other siblings and kind of go confront their father and like meet him again. And what's really interesting is that their father has taken on different like personas with each family. So for the oldest brother, the father is like a writer, and then his son ends up becoming a writer and ends up being more successful than him. So in the second family, the father is a farmer, and the daughter ends up like continuing on this really successful farm, and she's like been written about in different magazines and is like very important in like the farming community. In the third family, the father was a basketball star, so his daughter ends up being a collegiate athlete for basketball, and when she's thrown into this adventure with the other siblings, she is actually in the NCAA finals. I think it's like the final game or something like that, Final Four, one of the higher up ones. And then the last sibling, their father is like a filmmaker, so then he ends up becoming a filmmaker. And it's a really interesting way to tell this story of all these different people and how they come together and how they view their father, and how there's so much build up during this like road trip as they are talking about and thinking about their father and reflecting on their own lives and what not having their father in their life has meant for them, and then how they feel when they are confronted with their father after so long and how those feelings kind of change. I really liked all of the characters. I thought they were all very endearing and very like well-rounded. I think it's pretty easy to, especially in a story like this, have all the characters kind of feel one note, but they all felt complex in their own different way. My only complaint is that they did all speak the exact same. They all used kind of the same slang, the same like pauses, all of that. But overall, I really liked it. I thought it was cute. I think it would make a really like cute summer movie. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book I read is Life for Sale by Yukio Mishima. This book was written in, I believe, like the 1960s, and it is about a character, a man who is, I think he's 23 or 25. He's in his like early to mid 20s, and he puts up an ad to sell his life. So people can pay and he will do kind of, whatever for them. And he ends up being swept into this entire like conspiracy with this like underground kind of like secret agency, and everyone who he encounters, every person who hires him, he ends up not actually dying, so he has to keep on reselling his life. And it's kind of funny in like a very satirical way that he's just like, his one goal is to die and he just doesn't. I really liked the kind of episodic nature of each of the people who hires him, and I thought that it was overall pretty good. I think it did kind of drag in some spots, especially like I would say by the third or fourth person who hires him, just because so everyone who hires him is like, well, don't you want to hear what I want you to do and why? And they launch into this huge backstory, And at first it was like kind of fun, but then it got kind of old and kind of slow. So that would be my biggest complaint, but overall I did think it was fun. I did like it. The narration was really good in the audiobook. And I gave it a 3 out of 5. Okay, the next book I read is Antinora by Dory Lumpkin. This was the second 5 out of 5 star book that I had read this year. I loved this. So it was a very short novella, and it takes place in, I think it's literally called like Baptist Alabama or something. And it is this very religious and rural community, very insular. And it follows these two girls, Nora and I don't remember the other girl's name. It follows Nora and her friend, and it's from the point of view of the friend. So everything, like, she's a very unreliable narrator. She has a very, obvious spin on the events that happens. And Nora is an outcast. She thinks very differently than these religious folk. She's kind of aggressive in ways and very brutal in others. She does things that are kind of grotesque just to kind of get a rise out of the community. And it follows kind of the start of like this issue, right? Again, from the point of view of our narrator, the only friend of Nora's. And I said that this was a perfect blend of like Jennifer's Body and The Crucible, because you have those elements of like the friendship that's like a little bit more, and this character who's just kind of taking control and kind of getting back at the society that she lives in. And then The Crucible, because you have this like massive religious element, and Nora is like the brunt of it, so it kind of has this like witch trial-esque element to it. And I thought it was really good for how short it was, because it is also 116 pages. It took me less than a day to read, and I thought for how short it was, you get so much depth of these two characters. You really feel for Nora, and without the author explicitly explaining every single aspect of this religious community, you still get an understanding for, you're able to kind of extrapolate what this community would think and feel and their beliefs. I loved it. I really recommend it. It was really hard to find. I saw it when I was browsing for books at Barnes and Noble, but I had not been able to find it anywhere online for free, at least. Could not find an audiobook, could not find an ebook, so I ended up going back and buying it, and I'm so happy I did. I love it. 5 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend it. Okay, the next book I read was Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. I thought that this was not my favorite. This was not my favorite. I felt like this was a book that if I had read when I was like 13 or 14, I would have eaten it up. The lyricism and the prose in this book is so melodramatic Tumblr core, and not in a good way. The relationships in this book also are just so melodramatic. It follows Andrew and Thomas, I believe, and they have feelings for each other, but I think it's Andrew is mostly pining after Thomas, and Thomas doesn't really like explain his feelings till the very end of the book. And so there's that like tension there, I guess, because Thomas is like, it's obvious I like you, but Andrew's like, no one could like me because I'm just a silly little stupid boy. And they live at this like private boarding school, and they're outcast because they're just like so artsy and cool and not like other people. Anyway, so Andrew writes like books, like he writes a lot of prose and all of that, and then Thomas draws what Andrew writes, and as he's drawing, eventually his drawings come to life, and they have it's like these monsters that they end up having to battle in the woods. My biggest issue with this book was just how it was written. The lyricism and the prose really got old really fast, because again, it just felt like it was meant for a Tumblr post, but instead it was an entire book. I also had a really big issue with how this book ended. Trigger warning for self-harm and suicide, I suppose. The book ends, to me, what was in a very like unclear kind of way. I interpreted it as Andrew killing himself in a sacrifice for Thomas. And it's really graphic. There's a lot of graphic detail, and again, it's written with this like romanticism and like romanticization of like suicide and self-harm throughout a lot of the book. Okay, I feel like I should really just like give an example of what I'm talking about. So I have the preview pulled up, and I do just want to state that the author does give content warnings for the beginning of this book. I think I missed that because I listened to the audiobook, but the content warnings that the author gave is blood/gore, body horror, panic attacks, grief, eating disorder, bullying, and self-harm. But just to like give you an example of the way that this book is written and the things that are kind of being said, I'll just read like the first couple paragraphs of the book. It says, "It hadn't hurt the day he had cut out his own heart. Andrew had written about it later in spidery lines from a sharp pen, a story about a boy who took a knife to his chest and carved himself open, showing ribs like mossy tree roots, his heart a bruised and wretched thing beneath. No one would want a heart like his, but he'd still cut it out and given it away. Being left aching and hollow was a familiar feeling, a comfortable pain. Andrew had always been an empty boy." So, like, you can kind of see what I'm saying with, like, the melodramatic spin on things, but also, like, this first page kind of echoes how the book ends in what I felt like a literal way. So if you can kind of read between the lines on that, I just think I'm too old for it. Sorry. I do appreciate that there were content warnings given, but that's not something that everyone's going to see, and I just feel like some of it was too graphic for this being a young adult book. That I just think is really not okay for a book aimed at young adults. I could imagine if I read this when I was in like the throes of Tumblr self-harm romanticization, that I would have like, again, I would have eaten this up and thought that it was the greatest thing ever. It would have just added to this already like very harmful idea that perpetuates and surrounds self-harm that I just don't think is good. I, as an adult, can sit back and see these two characters and see their flaws and see how melodramatic they are and know that as adults, everything would be fine. But I don't think I would feel the same way as a child or as a young adult. And I think that's my biggest issue with this book, and was my biggest issue with this book. I gave it a 1 out of 5. And again, it's not even necessarily like the subject matter, but it's really just how it was written. The prose did not work for me. It dragged. It went on for so long, and the ending was especially distressing. I don't recommend this one. Okay, the next book I read was The Graceview Patient by Caitlin Starling. This is the same author as The Starving Saints, which I did try to read earlier, I think last year, and I just didn't get into it. I soft DNF'd it, but I did finish this one, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. This is a book about a character who has a chronic illness, a rare chronic illness, and is kind of at wit's end, trying for treatment, and is really struggling to get by in life because of their illness. And they end up being selected for a clinical trial where they will live in a hospital and get paid during the time. And it chronicles what this treatment is and all of the horror that can come with being a patient of this type. It kind of delves into ideas of like desperation, and then the like not really having a choice in things. It gets to the point where our character wants to leave, but the pharmaceutical rep for the company basically explains that she really has no choice but to stay, because if she were to leave, she has no money. She's too sick to really leave. There's nothing out there for her, and at least there's something there for her. At least there's a bed, and she's getting food there. So it kind of delves into some of that. Something that I've heard happens with The Starving Saints is that you're kind of left not really knowing what's real, what's fake, and like what actually happened. And that is definitely the same in this book. I wish that there was a bit more of a concrete answer at the end, and I wish we were given a bit more details of what was actually happening throughout the book, because we only know truly as much as our main character knows, and there's a lot that is hidden from her and that she is speculating on. And I think it would have been just a little bit more like satisfying and satiating to have more concrete answers throughout the book than what we actually got. I also feel like it got to the point, especially during like a 3/4 of the way through, where things were just getting kind of really repetitive, and there's only so much like body horror that you can do in a hospital before it just feels unnecessary and grotesque for us, the reader. And I definitely was kind of getting to that point in the book, but I did keep reading because like I wanted to know what was happening. And I think overall it was a pretty good book. I just don't think it was like the absolute best thing I've ever read because of how long and dragged out things started to feel. So I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Of Time and Turtles by Sy Montgomery. This is a nonfiction book surrounding Sy as she goes and helps out with different turtle rescues, and you learn a lot about turtles. I read a lot of reviews for this book that were either absolutely loved how much they learned about turtles or felt that there wasn't enough breakthrough information about turtles. So I think that this is a book for someone who's like me and who knows what turtles are and some of the things that are cool about them, but you don't know like in depth about them. I think this is like a really good way to just broaden your knowledge about turtles and other reptiles, but not anything like a herpetologist would really appreciate. I liked how this book was told. I liked how the story was told. It did get a little repetitive because she would bring up like this turtle that they rescued and then all of the love and care and everything that went into it. And then either like the turtle lives or dies. And it was like that for a lot of the book. I also I read this review because I had an issue with one chapter in this book where Sy is talking about the two founders of the specific turtle rescue and how they are both trans women. It felt so unnecessary because the book, like that chapter was really just like explaining what trans people are and like the different things that they might go through and how they might, you know, come to understand that they themselves are trans. And it just felt really weird and unnecessary because like any other like real world issue that was brought up in this book eventually tied back to turtles, right? So like this she wrote this about her experience during COVID. So she's talking about how like COVID time was like really weird for a lot of people, losing like their schedules and then the normalcy and the routine and all of that, and how 2020 for a lot of people just felt weird as like in a time sense, and how that relates to how turtles view time and how they age and all of that. And I appreciated that. But this one didn't really relate back. The only way that it really related back to turtles was that Sy basically said that because these two trans women have to be so vigilant toward about like being hate crimed or being outed, that they are able to be more vigilant for turtles in need. So I read this one comment that said, me when I stop my really interesting book about turtles to highlight how cool I am with trans people. And that comment is like living free in my head because I think that is so funny. Also so relatable. So I'm happy I'm not the only one who felt a little off put by that chapter because it felt really unnecessary. But overall, I think that Sy has a really good job at creating these stories. She narrated the audiobook and I thought it was a really good narration. You could tell that she had a lot of passion for what she was talking about and for these turtles and for these creatures. Again, I don't think it was the most breakthrough information about turtles ever, but I do think it's a really like good baseline. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moran. This was a sci-fi horror novella where a apocalypse starts, where if you look into someone's eyes, then like something snaps and they become very violent. So in this like post-apocalyptic world, our character lives alone and does not look at anyone. It's kind of like this new like faux pas to look above like someone's chin or like chest, really. And then someone comes along one day and kind of disrupts this solitary life that our main character had been living. And then we kind of learn that she is like pining after this new character. I think it's Riley, and I don't remember the other character's name. I'm so sorry. I'm so bad at remembering names. Overall, I thought this was fine. I think that some of the flowery language got in the way of the story at times, but I liked the story overall. I thought it was a very interesting take on like a pandemic and apocalypse. It's definitely a kind of contagion that I don't think I've ever seen in literature or media before, so I really liked that. And I thought it was pretty well done. I think that some of the things could have been a bit more fleshed out, but I believe in the author's note, Moran says that this started as a like short story and then turned into a novella. I thought it was fine. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Nothing too crazy, nothing bad. Okay, the last book I read in March was Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. I really hated this book, and I will post an entire video about it. It is a forbidden romance, I guess, between a high schooler and her English teacher. Because of course, it's always the English teachers. I have a lot of opinions about this book. I do not think it was good. I don't even want to get into it. I gave it a half star, and if I could rate it a 0, I would. I will record and post a video about it. It'll be the second time, actually, I record the video. The first time was with my broken mic, so the audio is really, really bad. But now I have a new mic, so I will record that and hopefully post it soon. But for now, just know I hated it, and I hated it. Really hated it. Okay, lastly, I did not DNF any books in March, although I probably should have. Looking back, I definitely should have DNF'd Into Thin Air. I ended up reading the Wikipedia article about like the event that is talking about, and got more entertainment and more knowledge from that single Wikipedia article than I did the entire book. I also probably should have DNF'd Half His Age, but I continued to read it because I wanted to make a video about it. So to each their own. Going into April, I'm currently in the middle of 3 different books, and I have finished 1 already. I'm in the middle of 2 of the same books that I have been in the middle of. One of them I really need to finish, but it's just taking me a bit to get through. And the other I started just a couple nights ago and think I will kind of breeze through pretty quick. I would say compared to February, March was like an okay reading month. I had a couple books that I really enjoyed, but I had a lot that I kind of didn't really enjoy, and a lot that I walked away from just feeling kind of not great about. So hopefully April's a bit better. I don't know, we'll see. I think I just started the year a little bit too high. I had a really good January reading month, and so it's been every book since that hasn't really hit that high that I'm chasing hasn't felt that great. So it is what it is. We're moving in April. We're moving into warmer weather. I'm excited to be able to be outside quite a bit more, go on more hikes, do more outdoorsy things, and just feel really good going into the summer. So I think that's all I have for today. Stay tuned for my Half His Age video. That should be coming pretty soon. I'm so ready to record it, so I never have to think about this book again. I've only seen a handful of videos that even talk about the book that have been recommended to me at the very least, so I'm kind of eager to put in my 2 cents, since I feel like it's a book that people just really aren't talking about in the way that they should. That's a whole other video, so I think that's all I have. Until next time, peace and love. Bye!